Welcome to the show. We're looking today at a really pivotal week in the U.S. Senate, that last week of October 2025. You send over a bunch of sources, and they paint a picture of, well, a chamber pulling in two directions at once.
That's a good way to put it. Monday through Thursday, you had this striking contrast. On one side, complete stalemate over the government's basic job funding itself. Looked like paralysis was setting in. But then on the other side, you saw this almost machine-like efficiency in confirming federal judges for lifetime posts, and even some surprising bipartisan moves challenging the president.
So our goal here is to unpack that. We want to understand what happened with the funding standoff, how those judicial confirmations kept rolling, and, where these unexpected cross-aisle alliances came from, especially on trade and environment.
And the key thing, I think, the thing we need to keep circling back to is how the Senate's own rules create this. That 60-vote requirement for most legislation leads to deadlock.
Yeah.
But the simple majority rule for judges, well, that allows for rapid fundamental change. It's a structural thing.
Definitely. Okay, before we get into the weeds on that structure, just a quick ask. If you find this kind of analysis helpful, please do take a second to like this episode and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep doing this kind of work for you.
And one other piece of context from the sources while the Senate was going through all this, the House of Representatives, mostly quiet. They were in what's called pro forma sessions.
Meaning no real legislative business?
Exactly. So the action, the high-stakes decisions about funding, about the courts, it was all happening on the Senate floor.
All right, let's start with that funding fight then. The shutdown clock was ticking all week. It wasn't really about the big budget picture yet, was it? It was all about procedure.
Completely. It was a battle fought with the Senate's own internal rules, almost like weapons.
So the specific bill at the center of this.
That was House Resolution 5371. Its formal title was the Continuing Appropriations and Extensions Act for fiscal year 2026. But everyone just calls it a continuing resolution, or a CR.
And a CR is basically just kicking the can down the road, right? It keeps the lights on, but doesn't resolve the underlying budget disagreements.
Precisely. Congress is supposed to pass 12 separate funding bills by October 1st, the start of the fiscal year. They hadn't. So this CR was needed just to prevent a government shutdown. It keeps funding going, mostly at the previous year's levels.
Just buying time.
Buying time is exactly it. This specific CR, House Resolution 5371, was designed to fund the government only until November 21st, 2025.
Okay, that date sounds significant. November 21st.
It's very strategic. That date falls right before the Thanksgiving congressional recess. So setting that deadline creates immense pressure. It basically forces another confrontation just before a holiday break, maximizing the leverage for whichever side feels it has the upper hand, minimizes negotiating time.
And this bill wasn't starting cold in the Senate. It had already passed the House.
Yes, it had. But narrowly. The vote in the House was 217 to 212. So it squeaked through there. And the White House was publicly supporting it, putting out statements warning Congress not to trigger what they called a senseless government shutdown.
So it arrived in the Senate with this sense of urgency, but also obviously political baggage.
Urgency from leadership, yes. But clearly not enough consensus to guarantee smooth passage.
Which brings us to the procedural battlefield. Even getting the bill onto the Senate floor for debate became the main fight.
That's where it stalled. The immediate hurdle was something called the motion to proceed to the bill. It sounds like a formality, right? Just agreeing to start talking about it.
Yeah, it seems basic.
But in the Senate, even that first step can be blocked. It requires overcoming procedural obstacles, specifically the filibuster, unless everyone agrees.
So walk us through what happened on Tuesday, October 28th. There was a key vote, but it wasn't straightforward.
Right. First, the majority leader had to execute a maneuver. They had to get the Senate to agree to reconsider a previous vote that had failed, a vote on something called cloture.
Cloture meaning the procedure to end debate.
Exactly. They had previously failed to get the 60 votes needed to invoke cloture or end debate on the motion to proceed. So, Tuesday morning, they first voted to give themselves a do-over on that cloture vote.
Okay, got it. So they reset the clock, essentially.
They did. And then they held the actual crucial vote.
Yeah.
The second attempt to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed to House Resolution 5371. This was the vote to see if they could finally start debating the funding bill itself.
And this is where that magic number 60 comes in.
This is the wall. The vote failed. The tally was 54 yeas to 45 nays.
54 votes. So a clear majority of senators actually wanted to move forward with the bill.
A very clear majority. 54 senators voted yes, let's proceed, let's try to avoid a shutdown. But because of the Senate's filibuster rule, you need 60 votes, 3/5 of the Senate, just to end debate on the motion to start debate.
It sounds a bit convoluted when you lay it out like that.
It is, but that's the reality of Senate procedure. That minority of 45 senators, by staying unified, was able to use the rules to prevent the majority from even bringing the funding bill up for discussion.
What's the strategic thinking behind blocking the motion to proceed? I mean, for those 45 senators, are they just trying to run out the clock? Or are they trying to force concessions?
It's primarily about leverage. By denying those crucial 6 votes needed to reach 60, the minority forces the majority leader into a tough spot. Either the leader has to start negotiating, maybe agreeing to add certain policy riders to the funding bill that the minority wants.
Like changes to border policy or limits on how agencies can spend money, stuff we often see attached to these bills.
Exactly those kinds of things. Or the alternative for the majority leader is to just let the process fail and risk a shutdown, hoping the political blame falls on the minority. Blocking the motion to proceed is a powerful tool to demand changes before the debate even starts. It highlights the power of a cohesive minority.
So, after that failed vote on Tuesday, the Senate was basically stuck on funding for the rest of the week.
Pretty much. The official record for Wednesday and Thursday shows the Senate was technically still considering the motion, but no progress was made. The stalemate held.
And the only option left was
The majority leader filed another cloture motion on Thursday, setting up the exact same vote for the following week. So that failure on Tuesday guaranteed the crisis atmosphere would just build and build as that November 21st deadline got closer.
Let's make sure we connect this back to why it matters beyond Capitol Hill. You mentioned the White House warning of a senseless shutdown. The sources detail some real consequences if funding actually lapses.
They do. It's not just political theater. A shutdown has immediate, tangible effects. The sources mention things like the Social Security Administration halting the issuance of new cards and stopping benefit verification processes.
Which could affect people needing to prove income or eligibility for other services.
Absolutely. And think about the economy. Many mortgage applications or business loans require income verification from the IRS. That process can shut down. So people trying to buy a house, get a loan, they could find their plans suddenly on hold.
And then there are the more visible things, like parks.
Right? National parks often close their gates.
Yeah.
Museums shut down. That impacts tourism, local economies. And critically, the sources point out, uniformed military personnel keep working. They have to, but their paychecks get delayed. That's a huge issue for military families.
There's an actual economic cost, too, isn't there, looking back at past shutdowns?
Yes, the sources cited the 2018-2019 shutdown as an example. The estimate was that it reduced the country's GDP, our total economic output, by about $11 billion.
$11 billion, that's substantial.
And here's the part that really stands out. About $3 billion of that $11 billion loss was considered permanent, economic activity that just vanished. It never came back. So these procedural fights, failing to get 60 votes, they have real, measurable economic consequences for everyone.
Okay, so that's the story on the funding side. Paralysis dictated by the 60-vote rule. Now let's pivot. Let's talk about the other track running in the Senate that week, the confirmation of judges. Because here, the story is the opposite. It's all about speed and efficiency.
It's the perfect illustration of the Senate's split personality. Funding bill needs 60 votes. Gridlock. Confirming lifetime judicial appointments. That only needs a simple majority.
And that simple majority threshold is thanks to changes in Senate rules over the last decade or so, right?
Yeah.
Removing the filibuster for nominations.
Exactly. First for lower court judges and executive appointments, then later for Supreme Court nominees. So now, confirming a judge requires just 51 votes, or 50 votes plus the vice president breaking a tie.
Which means even a very slim Senate majority can systematically reshape the federal judiciary for decades, even while struggling to pass basic legislation.
It turns the confirmation process into what you called an assembly line. The procedural hurdles are minimal compared to legislation. The majority controls the schedule. They can force an end to debate, invoke cloture with just their simple majority, and then hold the confirmation vote relatively quickly. The minority has very few tools to slow things down significantly.
And we saw this assembly line in action right from the start of the week, Monday, October 27th.
We did. 3 judges were confirmed in just 2 days. First up was Rebecca L. Tableson. She was confirmed to be a U.S. Circuit Judge for the 7th Circuit. That's an important appellate court position, one step below the Supreme Court.
In her vote count.
It was 52 yeas to 46 nays. Now think about that number, 52 votes. On the funding bill, 54 votes was a failure. Here, 52 votes is a solid victory, securing a lifetime appointment on a major federal court.
Perfect example of the difference that 60-vote threshold makes. Who else was confirmed on Monday?
Also on Monday, Bill Lewis was confirmed to be a U.S. District Judge for the Middle District of Alabama. These are the trial courts of the federal system. His vote was a bit wider, 58 yeas to 40 nays.
Suggesting maybe a little bit of bipartisan support there, or at least less unified opposition.
Likely, yes. Sometimes district court nominees who are seen as less ideological or who have strong local backing get a few more votes from the minority party.
And then the confirmations continued on Tuesday, the 28th.
Yes, Jordan Emery Pratt was confirmed for the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Florida. His vote was 52 yeas to 47 nays. So another tight, mostly party line vote, but again, enough for confirmation under the simple majority rule.
3 confirmations in 2 days. That sets a pace. But they didn't stop there, did they? They immediately moved to the next nominee.
No pause at all. The floor schedule was clearly managed to maximize the number of judges moved through the process. Next in line was Edmund G. LaCour, Jr., nominated for the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Alabama.
And what was the action on his nomination on Tuesday?
On Tuesday, they took the key procedural step, voting to invoke cloture, to end the debate on his nomination. That vote succeeded, 53 yeas to 46 nays. Again, 53 votes, nowhere near enough for legislation, but perfectly adequate to shut down debate on a judicial nominee.
And that cloture vote teed up the final confirmation vote for the next day.
Exactly. With cloture invoked, the final confirmation vote for LaCour was held on Wednesday, October 29th. He was confirmed by a vote of 51 yeas to 47 nays, another very narrow margin, but enough.
It really shows the strategic sequencing. Use Tuesday to get cloture on one nominee, confirm him Wednesday, and presumably use Wednesday and Thursday to advance the next ones in the queue.
That's the pattern. They're using every available bit of floor time not consumed by the funding fight to push these confirmations. It's clearly a top priority for the majority.
And the pipeline didn't empty out after LaCour. They kept the process moving right through Thursday, setting things up for the following week, too.
Absolutely. This wasn't just about clearing a backlog. It was about continuous throughput. On Thursday, October 30th, the Senate voted to invoke cloture on Joshua D. Dunlap. He's nominated for the U.S. Circuit Judge position on the First Circuit, another critical appellate court.
And the vote count for Dunlap's cloture?
51 yeas to 47 nays. Again, that bare majority is enough. So his final confirmation vote was set for the following week. Getting these circuit court judges confirmed is arguably one of the most lasting impacts a Senate majority can have.
And even as they set up Dunlap's final vote, they started the clock on the next nominee.
Immediately. Consideration began on Thursday for Eric Chen-Yi-Tung, nominated for the U.S. Circuit Judge seat on the Ninth Circuit. That's another hugely significant appellate court covering the West Coast. His cloture vote was formally scheduled for the following Monday, November 3rd.
So the takeaway is pretty stark. Gridlock on funding, but a relentless, strategically managed, and highly successful push to confirm judges using that simple majority pathway.
It underscores the different rules governing different types of Senate business and how the majority party prioritizes using the rules to its advantage where it can, particularly on lifetime judicial appointments.
Okay, now let's shift to maybe the most unexpected part of the week described in the sources. We saw the rigid party lines that defined the funding fight, and the judicial vote suddenly break down. There was the surprising bipartisan alliance challenging the president's trade policies.
This was fascinating, because here, senators seemed to be motivated by something other than just party loyalty. It looked like a coalition formed around sort of 2 core principles that cut across party lines.
What were those principles driving this unusual cooperation?
First, it seemed to be about institutional power. A number of senators from both parties appeared to feel that the executive branch, regardless of who is president, was encroaching on Congress's constitutional role in regulating foreign trade. It was Congress defending its own turf in a way.
Ah, so a separation of powers issue, Article 1 versus Article 2.
Exactly. And the second driving force seemed to be economic philosophy. The long-standing debate within both parties, but especially the Republican Party, between free trade advocates and protectionists. Some senators prioritize free markets over the administration's tariff policies.
So for this specific issue, trade and tariffs, Some senators were willing to vote against a president of their own party because they felt either Congress's power was being undermined or the economic policy itself was wrong.
That appears to be the case based on the votes. The sources show a small but consistent group of Republicans joined with Democrats on these votes. They prioritized what they saw as constitutional principles or sound economic policy over sticking with their party leadership and the White House.
And this wasn't just one vote. It was a series of votes over 3 days using a specific legislative tool.
Right. They used Senate Joint Resolutions. On Tuesday, October 28th, the Senate passed Senate Joint Resolution 81. This one aimed to terminate specific tariffs the president had imposed on goods coming from Brazil.
And the vote on that Brazil tariff resolution.
It passed 52 yeas to 48 nays. What's really notable there is that 5 Republican senators crossed the aisle to vote with the Democrats, providing the margin of victory.
5 Republicans breaking ranks on a trade vote against their own administration, that's significant. It suggests some real pushback, maybe links to specific industries like agriculture that are affected by tariffs on Brazilian goods.
That's a very likely factor. Constituent pressure often plays a role. And the pattern continued. On Wednesday, October 29th, they passed Senate Joint Resolution 77. This one targeted tariffs on goods from Canada.
And the vote there.
A bit closer, but still successful. 50 yeas to 46 nays. Still required some crossover votes. It reinforced the message that key trading partners shouldn't be subject to these executive actions without congressional input.
And then on Thursday, they went after the underlying justification the president was using.
Yes, that was Senate Joint Resolution 88. It passed 51 yeas to 47 nays. This resolution was broader. It aimed to terminate the national emergency declaration that the administration had used as the legal basis for imposing many of these tariffs globally in the first place.
So, taking these 3 votes together, Brazil, Canada, and the emergency declaration, it looks like a very deliberate, formal rebuke from the Senate to the White House on trade policy.
It really does. It's the Senate using its legislative power to directly challenge the executive branch's actions and rationale.
Let's unpack that rationale a bit. How is the executive branch justifying using national emergency powers to impose tariffs? That seems like a stretch.
The argument, based on certain existing laws, is that the president can act unilaterally if imports are deemed a threat to national security. The administration had been defining large trade deficits themselves as a form of national security threat. By declaring a national emergency related to this, they argued they could impose tariffs without needing specific new legislation from Congress authorizing them.
And the counter-argument from this bipartisan Senate coalition was rooted in the Constitution.
Directly in the Constitution. Article I explicitly gives Congress, not the president, the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. Tariffs are essentially taxes on imported goods. This Senate coalition was arguing that the president was using the emergency powers loophole to usurp Congress's core constitutional authority over taxing and trade.
Beyond the constitutional principle, there were also the economic arguments against the tariffs themselves, right? The impact on consumers and businesses.
Absolutely. The opponents consistently made the case, which most economists agree with, that tariffs are largely paid by domestic importers and thus passed on to American consumers and businesses in the form of higher prices. It's not really a tax on the foreign country.
Did the sources mention any specific cost estimates?
Yes. One estimate highlighted was that the existing tariffs could effectively raise taxes by over $1,600 per year for the average American household. That's a very concrete number that resonates with voters and likely motivated some of those crossover votes.
So let's be realistic. These Senate joint resolutions passing the Senate, what are the chances they actually become law? Don't they need House approval and the president's signature?
The chances are very slim. It's unlikely the House would even take them up, given its different political dynamics. And even if they did, they would almost certainly face a presidential veto, which would be very difficult to override.
So the significance isn't really about changing the law immediately. It's more symbolic.
It's symbolic, but it's also more than that. It's an institutional statement. Passing these resolutions creates a formal legislative record of Senate opposition. It can provide support for legal challenges against the tariffs, and it sends a clear political signal to the White House and future administrations that a majority of the Senate views these unilateral tariff actions as an overreach. It shows that the simple majority can be a tool for Congress to push back, even if it can't force a policy change on its own.
Okay, let's move to another area where that simple majority rule is crucial. Environmental regulations and the Congressional Review Act, or CRA. The Senate used the CRA twice this week with very different results.
That's right. The CRA is another one of those powerful procedural tools available to the Senate majority.
Remind us how the CRA works. What makes it so potent?
The Congressional Review Act gives Congress a window of time, typically 60 legislative days, after a federal agency finalizes a new regulation, to pass a joint resolution of disapproval. If that resolution passes both the House and Senate and gets signed by the president or overrides a veto, the regulation is overturned.
And the key procedural advantage in the Senate.
The key is that these resolutions of disapproval under the CRA are privileged. They cannot be filibustered. They only require a simple majority vote to pass the Senate.
So just like judicial nominations, a simple majority can use the CRA to undo regulations they don't like, bypassing the 60-vote hurdle needed for normal legislation.
Exactly. It's often used when control of Congress and the White House changes hands, allowing the new majority to quickly roll back regulations issued late in the previous administration's term. But it can be used anytime within that window.
So the first CRA fight this week involved oil and gas drilling in Alaska, Senate Joint Resolution 80, and this one was successful for the proponents.
Yes, it was. Senate Joint Resolution 80 aimed to disapprove a rule from the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM. This rule had placed new restrictions on oil and gas leasing in a huge area called the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, known as the NPRA.
Okay, National Petroleum Reserve. The name itself suggests a certain purpose.
It does. And the politics lined up accordingly. The debate around the CRA resolution was heavily focused on economics, jobs in Alaska, and U.S. energy independence.
What was the core argument for overturning the BLM rule?
Proponents argued that Congress had originally designated the NPRA for oil and gas development, and that the BLM rule was an executive overreach that hindered this mandate. They framed it as removing a regulatory barrier to economic growth and domestic energy production.
And the voting showed this argument had traction.
It did. First, on Wednesday, October 29th, the procedural vote to proceed to the resolution passed 54 yeas to 46 nays, showing solid support.
Then the final vote.
The final passage happened on Thursday, October 30th. Senate Joint Resolution 80 passed 52 yeas to 45 nays. It successfully overturned the BLM rule.
And was that vote strictly party line?
Interestingly, no. The sources note that one Democrat joined the Republicans in voting to overturn the rule. This suggests that the arguments linking the drilling to regional jobs and energy policy resonated across the aisle, at least for one senator.
Okay, so CRA success on Alaska drilling, driven by economic and energy arguments. Now let's contrast that with the other CRA resolution considered that week, Senate Joint Resolution 69, dealing with owls. This one went down in flames.
A completely different outcome. Senate Joint Resolution 69 sought to disapprove a rule from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This rule concerned a management strategy for the barred owl, primarily in Washington, Oregon, and California. It's related to protecting the habitat of the endangered northern spotted owl, which the barred owl competes with.
So a more complex ecological issue, not directly tied to large-scale resource extraction like the Alaska case.
Exactly. It involved debates about managing invasive species versus native species, habitat conservation, complicated stuff, without a clear, overarching economic benefit narrative like the oil drilling resolution had.
And the vote showed a massive lack of support.
Overwhelmingly so.
Yeah.
The key vote was on the motion to proceed just to begin consideration of Senate Joint Resolution 69. That vote, held on Wednesday, failed spectacularly. Only 25 yeas to 72 nays.
25 to 72, that's a blowout. 72 senators voted against even debating the disapproval resolution.
That's right. More than two-thirds of the entire Senate essentially said, we don't even want to touch this.
It signals a massive lack of political appetite for overturning that particular Fish and Wildlife Service rule.
What does this huge contrast tell us? Both were CRA resolutions. Both needed only a simple majority to pass. Why did one succeed and the other fail so dramatically?
It's a clear lesson in political priorities and framing. Even though the CRA allows a simple majority to overturn a rule, you still need the political will to push it through. Senate Joint Resolution 80, the Alaska drilling one, was successfully framed around big, tangible issues: energy, jobs, economic development. That resonated.
Where's the barred owl resolution?
It was perceived, it seems, as a more niche environmental issue, maybe seen as interfering with complex, science-based conservation efforts. It lacked that powerful economic or energy security hook. The leadership likely saw the writing on the wall, knew it had no chance, and the vote just confirmed it. So the takeaway is that the CRA is a powerful tool, but its effectiveness depends heavily on the politics of the specific regulation being targeted. If it's not tied to major economic interests, even a simple majority might be impossible to muster.
Precisely. The failure of the OWL resolution suggests that unless there's a strong economic or resource-based argument, the Senate is generally reluctant to use the CRA to intervene in complex environmental management rules.
All right. Amidst all these high-profile battles, the funding crisis, the judge confirmations, the tariff fights, the CRA votes, the sources also remind us that the everyday business of Congress continued. Committees were meeting, bills were being introduced.
Yeah, the gears of the legislative process keep turning, even when the main floor action is dramatic or stalled. It's important not to lose sight of that routine, but essential work.
So what kind of routine activity did we see new bills being introduced?
Quite a few. The sources mentioned 4 bills and 3 resolutions introduced on Monday alone, and then another 9 bills and 5 resolutions on Tuesday. This is the constant feed into the legislative pipeline.
And much of this seems focused on very specific, often geographically based issues, particularly land management.
That's very common. These are often the result of long-term work with local stakeholders. We saw several measures reported out of committee, meaning they cleared a key hurdle. For example, House Resolution 197 involved a land exchange up in the Chippewa National Forest in Minnesota.
Land exchanges can be complicated, right? Trading federal land for state or private land?
Often, yes. Done to consolidate ownership, improve management, or resolve claims. Another one mentioned was House Resolution 1612, dealing with the Flatside Bethune Wilderness in the Wichita National Forest, which spans Arkansas and Oklahoma.
There was also work on trails and scenic areas.
Yes, Senate Bill 1376 was reported, which calls for a study on designating the Benton-McKay Trail as a national scenic trail. That trail runs through several Appalachian states, and Senate Bill 1681 moved forward, aiming to establish the Shenandoah Mountain National Scenic Area in Virginia. These often have strong bipartisan support locally.
The Environment and Public Works Committee seemed particularly busy reporting out substantive bills, too.
They were. On Wednesday, they advanced several important pieces of legislation. Senate Bill 2082 dealt with modifying the definition of a production facility under the Atomic Energy Act. That sounds technical, but it has big implications for nuclear fuel reprocessing and waste management.
What else came out of that committee?
They also reported Senate Bill 2235, which reauthorizes funding for a program aimed at reducing diesel emissions. Think trucks, buses, construction equipment. And Senate Bill 2878 reauthorized funding for monitoring and research related to the Great Lakes Basin, a huge ongoing environmental effort.
So important policy work moving forward, even if it doesn't grab headlines. And then there were purely symbolic measures, the commemorative resolutions.
Right. These usually pass quickly by unanimous consent, showing areas where everyone can agree. The Senate passed several this week. Senate Resolution 467 designate October 30th as a day of remembrance for nuclear weapons program workers.
Recognizing service and sacrifice.
Yeah. Exactly. Senate Resolution 468 marked October 26th as the Day of the Deployed, honoring military members serving overseas.
And some focused on awareness months.
Yes. Senate Resolution 471 recognized October as National Dyslexia Awareness Month. Senate Resolution 474 designated October as National Country Music Month. And Senate Resolution 479 supported the goals of Red Ribbon Week, focusing on drug prevention during the last week of October. Small acts, but part of the Senate's routine.
Beyond bills, the committee hearings are where a lot of the deep policy dives happen, often laying groundwork for future legislation. What were some key topics covered in hearings that week?
The committees were active across the board. The Judiciary Committee held 2 interesting hearings. One looked at competition in the seed and fertilizer industries, signaling potential interest in agricultural antitrust issues.
That could be significant for farmers.
Could be. And the same committee also held a hearing on politically motivated violent attacks and their threat to the constitutional order, so covering both economic structure and domestic security concerns.
What about the Commerce Committee? They seemed focused on technology and industry.
They continued a series of hearings titled Big Tech and Silencing Americans Part 2, suggesting ongoing scrutiny of social media platforms, content moderation, and free speech issues online. They also held a hearing on reviving the U.S. commercial shipbuilding industry, linking it to economic and national security goals.
The Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, known as HELP, what were they looking at?
HELP focused on U.S. competitiveness in biotechnology, examining how to keep the country at the forefront of life sciences innovation. And very importantly, they scheduled an upcoming hearing for the nomination of Casey Means to be Surgeon General, a critical public health position requiring their vetting.
National security nominations were also moving.
Yes, the Armed Services Committee held a hearing for Vice Admiral Richard A. Carell's nomination to become a four-star admiral and take command of U.S. Strategic Command, the organization responsible for the nation's nuclear forces. A hugely important role.
And given the funding fight, another hearing seems particularly relevant.
The Indian Affairs Committee held one examining how government shutdowns and potential agency staff reductions impact Native American communities. These communities often rely heavily on federal programs and services, so shutdowns can hit them especially hard.
Finally, the Finance Committee, usually busy with nominations.
They were. They held hearings on several key economic policy nominees, including Jeffrey Goatman to be Deputy U.S. Trade Representative and Arjun Modi for Deputy Commissioner of Social Security. These roles are crucial for managing trade negotiations and the massive Social Security system.
And just to round out the picture, there's the constant flow of nominations coming in from the White House and sometimes being withdrawn.
Exactly. The sources note new nominations were received, including Michael Selig from Florida to be Chairman and Commissioner of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, which oversees critical financial markets. And on the other side, a previous nomination, Joel Rayburn for Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, was formally withdrawn by the White House. It just shows the ongoing process of staffing the executive branch.
So when you pull back and look at the whole week, October 27th to 30th, it really does seem like the Senate was operating in two parallel universes.
It's a stark picture. Total gridlock on the absolute necessity of funding the government, dictated by that 60-vote requirement for legislation. But simultaneously, remarkable speed and effectiveness where only a simple majority was needed, especially in confirming judges.
The numbers really do say it all. 54 votes to keep the government open. Failure. 52 votes to put someone on a federal appeals court for life. Success.
That's the paradox of the modern Senate floor. And we also saw how that simple majority rule can empower other actions like those bipartisan votes to review the president's tariffs using Senate joint resolutions, or the successful CRA vote to overturn the Alaska drilling regulation. It becomes a tool for assertion, not just confirmation.
That pushback on the tariffs, that alliance of rivals, as the outline called it, feels particularly significant. It showed that, at least on issues touching on core constitutional powers or widely shared economic concerns, senators could find a way across the aisle to form a working majority, even if just for a symbolic statement.
It really stands out. Those votes on Senate Joint Resolutions 81, 77, and 88 directly challenging the executive's use of emergency powers for trade policy that might offer a clue about where future conflicts lie.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. Given how the 60-vote rule makes enacting major new policies, whether traditionally liberal or conservative, incredibly difficult.
Does this past week suggest that the most consequential political battles going forward might shift? Maybe less about the substance of policy A versus policy B, and more about the fundamental balance of power itself. Fights over executive authority, congressional prerogatives, the role of the courts, the very structure of how decisions get made.
Could these institutional power struggles become the main arena simply because they sometimes offer pathways, like the simple majority votes we saw, to actually get something done or make a statement, unlike traditional legislation?
It's something to watch. This tension over the balance of power between the branches seems like it will continue to shape just how much and what kind of things the government can actually accomplish. It's a structural dynamic that defined this week and likely many more to come.
A really compelling question to ponder as we see the Senate gearing up to face that funding deadline yet again. Thanks for joining us for this look at a complex week in Congress. We'll talk to you next time.